Chapter 72. Ral Zarek. A tense Ral knew it was now his turn. He had been hoping against hope that either Kaya or Vraska might have failed too. But no. Inhaling deeply and running one hand over his shaved head, he stepped forward into the Verity Circle, holding Tezzeret's arm. With a nod to the Wanderer, he described in a clear voice their journeys and battles. "All true," she confirmed, "although I am forced to admit that I lost consciousness and planeswalked away. I did not witness Tezzeret's end." All eyes in the Senate House turned to Ral Zarek, still holding Tezzeret's Ethereum arm. Niv-Mizzet and Tomik and everyone else expected him to regale them with the tale of his opponent's demise. Ral hesitated. Then, despite the fact that the Firemind had long ago taught him a spell that would thwart an Azorius Verity Circle, Ral told the absolute truth. "Tezzeret beat me. He could have easily killed me. Instead, he gave me this arm to use as false proof of his death. He assumed I would be too vain or too frightened to reveal that I had failed. I am neither." Everyone was too surprised to gasp or murmur. Thus, the silence allowed Ral to actually hear the Wanderer breathe a sigh of relief. This revelation clearly tallied with her assumptions. She said, "After recovering consciousness, I planeswalked back to Esper. The fortress was completely deserted, and too little time had passed for that to be the result of Tezzeret's forces meandering off on their own. It was an organized abandonment, which suggests that Tezzeret himself was behind it and used his planar bridge technology to execute it. Moreover, that technology, which had previously made it so easy for me to follow him, was no longer registering upon the blind eternities at all. I suspect that I had previously been overestimating my own skills, that Tezzeret had been intentionally leaving a trail for me. Now that he believes himself dead to the multiverse, he has made certain that trail has run cold." Ral dared a look at Niv-Mizzet, whose expression revealed acute disappointment in his protégé. Ral looked at Marie, who was smiling more broadly than Ral had ever known her to smile in her life. Finally, Ral looked at Tomik, whose face was full of pity for his lover. And somehow, that's even worse. Chapter 73. Chandra Nalar. Chandra leaned against a tree, chewing on a mint leaf and waiting. She was on Zendikar to see Nissa. Chandra had no idea where on this plane Nissa was, but she felt confident the tree would tell Nissa where Chandra was. That sounds ridiculous, but I bet it works. In times past, the anticipation, the desire, the need to see Nissa Revane made Chandra's heart flutter just a little bit, or a lot. Not today, or not tonight, I guess. It had been early morning when she'd left Ravnica, but here on Zendikar it was night, with a sliver of a moon hanging above the forest. So under that moon, leaning against that tree, Chandra waited for Nissa, with a decided lack of anticipation, filling her time by confronting her various demons. Despite what she had told Jaya, Chandra had not let her mom comfort her. Truthfully, she hadn't even seen Pia, let alone told her what was bothering her, in part because Chandra hadn't quite pinpointed exactly what was bothering her. It wasn't Jaya. Chandra hadn't liked what Jaya had done, keeping information from her and facilitating things that Chandra wouldn't have to make tough decisions or feel difficult feelings. But deep down, Chandra knew Jaya had meant well. In fact, if anything, Chandra felt the need to apologize to Jaya while making it clear that this former protégé didn't want her former mentor to protect her that way ever again. So what was troubling her? Is it Liliana's death? Or Gideon's? In part, it was both. Chandra knew she'd miss each of them terribly. She had loved them each in not dissimilar ways. The big sister she never had. The big brother she never had. Gids, at least, went out of his own terms. But it seemed especially sad that Liliana had in the end been completely unable to follow or find her true best self. Still, Liliana and Gideon had saved Ravnica, and probably the whole multiverse from Bolas, so Chandra was determined to make that her last memory of them. No, the main thing bothering Chandra was Dovin Baan. She still wasn't sorry he was dead, nor even sorry she had killed him. But killing Baan has taught her something about who she wanted to be, or at least who she didn't want to be. I'm not a hunter, not a killer. That's not me. And I can't simply be a survivor either. That's not enough. Before she could quite crystallize what might be enough, the ground beneath her feet began to stir. It felt a little like an earthquake, but Chandra knew better. She'd been looking down at her feet. Now she looked up. The turf before her had all but liquefied as it rolled toward her like a wave, and riding that wave, Nissa Revane. Chandra, she said. Nissa, Chandra said, hoping that for just a moment, for just one little moment, the sight of the elf would make the pyromancer's cheeks burn, make her heart skip a beat, give her those flutters. But no, Chandra had never been into girls. Her crushes, and she'd had her fair share, were mostly the brawny, indecidedly male types like Gids. But there was always something about Nissa Revane specifically, something the two of them shared in that great chemical mix, arcing between them like one of Ral Zarek's lightning bolts, that had thrilled her from the moment they first met. Now everything's different. It was over before it had ever had a chance to begin. Maybe they had missed their moment. A time when if Chandra had demonstrated more courage or more self-possession, she might have told Nissa how she felt. A time when if Nissa had acknowledged even the slightest hint of interest or self-knowledge, they might have found their way to each other. But that was oversimplifying things, and Chandra knew it, and she was fairly certain that Nissa knew it too. On Ravnica, in the wake of Gideon's death and Bolas's, they had admitted to each other that they loved. But both of them knew, deep down, they were only speaking platonically. And in any case, sometimes love isn't enough. As usual, Nissa said nothing. Chandra finally understood that words were simply not the elf's native tongue. She was uncomfortable with them. They overwhelmed her, now that this simple fact was finally clear, now that it was way too late. Chandra understood, and that understanding granted her tremendous sympathy for Nissa Revane. All this time, I've been trying to force her to speak to me in my tongue. And all this time she'd been all but begging me to speak in hers. And neither of us understood each other because we had no shared language. I'll always love you, Chandra said after they had been looking into each other's eyes for she had no idea how long. And I love you, Nissa struggled out in response. Present tense, immediate. Nissa doesn't change. She doesn't evolve. She just is. She exists in a state of is. But that doesn't work for me, because I have changed. I've changed more in the last 72 hours than I have since I first discovered I was a planeswalker. Gideon's death, Liliana's death, Baan's death, they have changed me, and changed what I want. But, Chandra began. Yes, Nissa said with the slightest of nods. You can tell me I'm wrong. Chandra was trying to help her, trying to translate Nissa's language into her own. correct me with a tiny shake of the head. But the truth is that I exhaust you, don't I? Nissa's eyes closed. There was no tiny shake of the head. She tried to speak then, tried for once to translate her language into Chandra's own. I could never keep up with you, your emotions. Yes, she said. We're meeting each other halfway. It's good, even if it is sad. You care for me, Chandra said. Nissa's eyes opened again, opened wide, as if Chandra had accused her of some horrible crime. The crime of not caring. Of course. And there was even some attraction. And I will always be very fond of you. I will always love you, Chandra repeated. Repeated because she needed the words on her side of this broken equation. She needed to hear herself say them out loud. But I exhaust you, and I understand that now. I'm big, and loud, and awful, and needy, and too damn much. I can't ask you to change yourself for me, and I can't change myself for you. I can't be with someone that I have to stifle myself to be with. Stifle myself to make you comfortable just to be around me. No, Nissa agreed. Neither of us would want that for the other. No, Nissa agreed, and she stroked her hand across Chandra's cheek, brushing aside a tear that Chandra hadn't realized she'd shed. The elf's touch was sweet and tender, and oh so very gentle, lovely as anything Chandra had ever experienced in her long, short life. And it's not enough, and that's sad a bit, but it's not a tragedy. Not a tragedy to finally know, after all, the will we or won't we of it all, that it isn't going to be. We are. But only Nissa lives in the state of is. I can't live with her in the state of are. That's not who I am or ever was. Nissa stepped back, and Chandra did the same. They came up for air, so to speak, not gasping or frantic. It was very much like a midnight swim under a sliver of moon, where their heads sink ever so briefly beneath the surface, and long before their lungs might have begun to struggle and burn, they break through the liquid plane, barely disturbing the mirror of the crescent in the water, and certainly not disturbing it for very long, so that each could take her cleansing, easy breath and say goodbye. You have your work here on Zendikar, Chandra said. Nissa didn't even bother nodding this time. She knew that Chandra now understood her language, the language of silence. Neither of them had to struggle anymore, but Nissa did want to learn Chandra's language too, or at least a few words. What will you do? She asked, which brought Chandra back to her earlier questions. What will I do? What do I want? Who do I want to be? A hunter like Vraska? A killer like Kaya? A mere survivor like Rahl? No. I want to be a hero. I want to help people. Frankly, I want to be Gideon freaking Jura. So Chandra Nalaar decided right then and there that Gideon was who she'd strive to be. She knew she might not always succeed, but the important thing was that she tried and kept trying no matter the odds. That's what Gids would do. And even that is an oversimplification, because she was a hunter. She was a killer. She was a survivor. And there was guilt, tremendous guilt, soul-crushing guilt, attached to all three of those truths. But she thought Gids might have felt that guilt as well. So if I can evolve into him, there's a chance I can find a way through it. Find a way past it. She'd returned to Kaladesh and to her mother's home. she could make that her base of operations. But then she'd walk and walk and walk, looking for trouble, looking for people in need, looking to be a one-woman gatewatch to solve as many of the multiverse's problems as she could, or die trying. She spoke none of these things, revealed none of these feelings out loud, elucidated none of her plans or goals, literally none of them. And she thought Nissa looked both a little grateful and like someone who understood. Nissa took her hand and squeezed it. Chandra squeezed Nissa's back. That was all the goodbyes they needed. Maybe they'd see each other again. They both certainly hoped they would. But maybe not. And if not, I can imagine a lot worse endings than this. Feeling determined, if not exactly happy, Chandra planeswalked away from the state of Is and from former dreams of the state of R, and returned to the evolving reality of Chandra R and that woman's new home base on Kaladesh. Chapter 74. Jace Beleren. Jace was in Vraska's quarters, feeling like the walls were closing in. He opened the door and stepped outside to check with Storev one more time. Is she? There wasn't even much point in finishing the question. I am sorry. No. Queen Vraska has not yet returned from the Council of the Guilds. If the Queen's royal consort would prefer... Please don't call me that. Liliana had once referred to Jace as her consort, and he hadn't been too thrilled with the title then either. Perhaps you'd prefer to be called the former Living Guild Pact? Jace will do just fine, thanks. As you wish, Jace. Admittedly, the Lich's whisper-thin voice lent itself to formal titles, and her calling him Jace had really just made things awkward for the both of them. Mr. Beleren, perhaps? That would be preferable, thank you. But shouldn't the guild meeting be over by now? I'm sure I don't know, Mr. Beleren. I probably could have gone, he said, more to himself than the erstwhile. I probably should have gone. But truthfully, Jace hadn't wanted to hear anything more about Liliana's death. He'd barely been able to get his head around the fact that she was gone. He knew he hadn't even begun to mourn her yet. Or Gideon, for that matter. Both their deaths are going to hit me soon. And hard. More than that, however, he had skipped the meeting because he was afraid to hear what Vraska was going to tell the others. He felt in his bones that the Golgari Queen was keeping things from her allies, and that Jace Beleren's lover was keeping things from him. And he simply had no idea what he was going to do about it. What I'm going to do about us. Chapter 75. Vraska. Once the guild meeting was satisfactorily concluded, and after making sure she wasn't being followed, Vraska went to see Bon to tell him that all had gone as planned. Unfortunately, Bon wasn't prepared to hear it, or anything. She found him in his safe house, with a smile on his face, and an even wider smile slit into his throat. There was no signs of struggle, but his left hand had been removed, though from the lack of blood around the wrist, it had apparently been removed post-mortem. For a moment, the Golgari Queen wondered if the body was a fake, more of Bon's wheels within wheels, but truthfully, she knew better. Dovin Bon was dead, killed by someone who had known exactly where to find him, killed by someone who knew Vraska had lied about his death, killed before Bon could give Vraska the rest of his plan to secure her rule over the Golgari. Vraska would still have trouble from Izani and the Devkaran, and now potentially from the other 9 guilds as well. Vraska had lied to everyone, including lies of omission to Jace, and she had done it all for nothing. She looked down at Dovin Bon's body with its gloating expression and its screaming irony. Now Vraska had all the proof of kill she needed, only now she couldn't use it. In fact, she'd have to destroy the body herself to make sure no one else could use it against her. Still, disposing of a body was the Golgari's bread and butter. Taking a deep breath, she set about that grim task. Chapter 76. Rat. Easily avoiding both living and mystical security with her insignificance, Rat returned to the cathedral opulent. She had spent a fun night with her mother, Ari, and even got to see and be seen by her father Gan Shokta and by Bor Borigmos when they returned from the guild meeting. They told Araethia and her mother that Master Dovin Bon and Miss Liliana Vess were dead, but that the Bolas minion Tezzeret was still at large in the multiverse. Of course, Rat didn't tell any of them that Miss Liliana was still alive too, but she told a version of what occurred on Gobakan and Dominaria, the summation of which amounted to, "I have grand adventures and friends." All three seemed to enjoy her tale. They expressed their pride in her and told her they were happy for her. Rat promised to come home and visit periodically. No one protested her going to other worlds for long stretches. "One good thing about the Gruul, they're not exactly precious with their children." Climbing in through her Orzova window now, she raced out of her assigned room to check in with Teo and Mistress Kaya. The guild meeting had gone well from their point of view as well. No hitches. They'd all leave for Fiora early the next day. Madame Blaze entered with a tray of tea and nearly smashed into Rat, who blithely dodged out of the way. When informed of this by Teo, the loyal servitor got quite flustered. A somewhat giddy Rat stole the sugar bowl off Madame Blaze's tray and held it upright in front of the woman's face, as the loyal servitor berated herself for forgetting it in the kitchen. Rat then replaced it on the tray, and the old woman wondered if she was losing her mind, before realizing that Mistress Araethia, whom she absolutely refused to call Rat anymore, was playing a little prank on old Blaze. Fortunately, the motherly woman didn't seem to mind the little joke at her expense. She was able to laugh with the others. Rat apologized through Teo, and Madame Blaze accepted her apology and moreover swore that one day she would find a way to see her young mistress in order to serve the poor girl better. Her determination almost brought a tear to Rat's eyes, or might have, except that right now, Araethia Shokta was too happy for tears. Happy as she was, Rat was still a bit sad over the loss of Mr. Egg and what it might have meant to her. Still, you gotta admit, sometimes it's a lot of fun being the Rat.